Have you ever seen an old farmhouse? In one of those places you were sitting by yourself at the end of a country road and felt your heart pull at you. Not interest or longing, but something stronger, something that told them without words that whatever happened inside those walls never really ended. Where are you hearing from right now before we start? Enter it in the box below. I always like to know where our listeners are because the places you name can hold stories, their own. But tonight we are going to a certain place. There is a farm called H. Halstead Farm in the southern Appalachians that is in an area of land that has been lost. Most maps from that time period barely even show this county. It was 1891. The people in charge tried very hard to keep what happened there in the fall from everyone. They were almost successful. Almost. This story was buried in a few old court papers that were getting worse. A few. There are letters all over the place, and memories of a place that learned the hard way that some ground holds on to what it's given. So, take a seat. If you dare, dim the lights. Pay close attention, because the details are more important than you think. Austin Mercer was 44 years old, tall and broad across the shoulders. His hands had been used for work ever since he could hold a tool. He looked older than he really was because of how worn down his face was. He had deep lines around his light gray eyes and a chin, set very tightly, as if he were always getting ready for something. A logging accident many years ago left a scar on the left side of his neck, just below the ear. On his right side, he walked with a slight limp because a horse had thrown him during a storm in 1883. Austin wasn't a very talkative person. His valley neighbors knew him as someone who worked from early morning until late at night, fixing fences and feeding animals, but who rarely went to church, socials, or get-togethers in town. He moved to that piece of land 8 years before. He bought the Halstead property from a bank in Asheville that had been trying to sell it for 10 years. The last owner, a man named Grover Fenwick, left the farm without giving a reason in 1880, leaving all of their things, including clothes, hanging on a line in the backyard. Grover was never heard from by the bank again. Nothing, not even letters or a moving address. When Austin showed up with his 39-year-old wife Dorrit, the farm was in terrible shape because she had sharp green eyes and red hair that she wore tight under a bonnet. Even though the land around the house had become wild, the 2-story building made of dark wood and stone still stood. The yard was full of weeds. The barn leaned a little to one side, as if something had moved under it, and the well, a deep stone well about 40 yards from the front porch, was closed off with planks and nails, as if someone wanted to keep water out. Very badly to stop something from entering or leaving. At the time, Austin didn't think much of it. He was an honest person. He got the land for a low price and planned to make it work. For her part, Dorrit had doubts from the very first day. In a letter from September 1883, 3 years after they moved in, she told her sister that the house felt different at night. It wasn't warmer or darker, but it felt heavier, like the air got thicker when the sun went down. I'm taking parts of what she wrote from, the pieces that were still there, that she would wake up some nights to the sound of something, not an animal, moving under the floors. That was clear to her. She grew up in Virginia on a farm, so she knew what raccoons and possums sound like when they are under the house. This was different. This was slow and deliberate, like something was dragging itself from one end of the house to the other, stopping now and then as if to listen. Austin didn't know. She didn't want to look stupid. And she thought for a while that it was just the house settling down, the wood growing and contracting with the weather, and the normal sounds that come from an old building getting used to its age. But things changed when fall 1891 came around. It began in early October, just as the leaves were beginning to change color, and the first sharp frosts were coming out. Apprentice Galt was Austin's hired farmhand for the season. He was 28 years old, thin and wiry, with dark brown eyes that were set deep, under a thick head. After the mine closed, Apprentice came down from a mining village further north to look for work anywhere he could find it. He was quiet, reliable, and strong, even though he wasn't very big. He slept in a small room connected to the barn. It had been used for storage before Austin cleared it out and put a cot, a chair, and a small iron stove in it. Nobody did anything during the first week. Austin and the apprentice worked together in the fields, fixing fences, getting the root cellar ready for winter storage by cutting back bushes. Every day, Dorrit made meals for all three of them. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun go down behind the hill. It seemed like a normal start, but on the 8th night, just after midnight, Prentice came to the main house. When Austin opened the door, he saw the young man standing there, pale and shaking. Apprentice said that when he woke up he heard a steady, regular tapping sound coming from under his bed. He said it went on for a few minutes and then stopped all of a sudden, leaving behind a soundless space where he could hear his own heartbeat. Then he heard something else right before he left. Sounds like someone is talking from a long way away, or deep underground because the voice is low and hard to make out. He said it was clear what the tone was, but he couldn't make out the words. It was a plea. Austin told him it was likely the wind blowing through cracks in the base of the barn. Apprentice said yes, but he didn't look, 100% sure. After he went back to his room, it was quiet the rest of the night. I'd like to take a moment to ask you something. In the middle of the night, have you ever heard something? Something that you couldn't explain, so you hid under the covers longer and told yourself it wasn't anything. I believe all of us have done that. I believe we all know why deep down. For the simple reason that we know there are some things in the world we are not supposed to face. Let me know if you've ever had that kind of time. I promise that those times will feel a little different after hearing the story. After 2 days, Dorrit saw something that really scared her. When they got there, the well was locked up, but she went to it anyway. Austin had broken into it and fixed it up during their first year on the land. When she looked down into the shaft while getting water for the kitchen, she saw something she had never seen before. The water was clear and cold most of the time. Not cloudy or dirty, but dark, as if something below the surface was taking in the light. She took a step back and dropped the bucket. She called Osselin, but by the time he got there and looked down, the water looked like it was fine. He tried it out. It had a good taste. He told her it was likely a shade from a cloud moving by. She agreed with the reasoning, but she sent her sister another letter that same night. She said something in it that gives me chills just reading it now. I do not think, she wrote. I don't think we've ever been alone on this land, he said. Things picked up speed the next week. The apprentice said he heard the tapping twice more, both times between midnight and 3 a.m., and both times from below the floor. He once said that when he put his ear to the boards, he could hear what sounded like people or something below him fighting for air. The breathing was slow and ragged. The animals started to act in strange ways. After, the 2 horses would not go into the barn. Sunset, with their eyes wide and ears flat against their heads, they stood outside in the cold. The hen quit laying eggs. Austin woke up one morning to find 3 of them dead in the coop. There were no marks on the bodies, no signs of animals, nothing. They had given up on life. Dorrit began to notice that some things in the house didn't fit. When she got down in the morning, she would pull out a chair that she had pushed up against the table. A door that she had locked would be wide open. Upstairs, there was a mirror that had been there since the beginning of time. Was found on the floor on Tuesday morning, face down. The glass wasn't broken, but the back of the frame had deep scratches that looked like someone had scratched at it from behind. Even though Austin was very realistic, he was starting to feel it too. In the evening, he told Prentice that he had started having dreams, and every night they were the same. He stood on the edge of the well and looked down. The water was slowly and steadily rising toward him, and he could see a face just below the surface. Not a face that looked completely human, but one that he knew. The mouth was open in a quiet scream, the eyes were wide and didn't blink, and every night the water rose a little higher. He would wake up just before the edge. Apprentice heard and didn't say anything. Apprentice told Austin something he hadn't told him before when he was done. He said that on his second night at the farm, before the tapping began, he had seen something as he walked back from the outhouse past the well. A tall, thin figure that was darker than the darkness around it stood next to it. Nothing about it could be made out by him. It was just standing there still, facing the well. He had become frozen, not able to move or speak. After a blink, it was gone. He had told himself it was just a trick of the eye and that he was just tired. Still, he didn't believe that after everything that had happened since then. Now that we're pretty far into the story, the fear behind you is telling it. If you are. If you like this, click the button that says subscribe right now. Just 1 second will help us keep giving you stories like this one. Don't worry if you hear this on another station. It was taken from us without our permission. Please let us know about it and find us on the original page. We value each and every one of you. Austin made a choice in the middle of October that would change everything. He chose to dig down under the barn. On the surface, his logic made sense. He told the student and Dorat so he could check the base before winter came to make sure the building was stable. But they all knew the real reason. To find the cause of the noise, he looked around. He was interested in what was below them. It was Wednesday morning when they started digging. In the part of the barn closest to where Apprentice slept, they pulled up the floors. The ground below was packed tight with dark red clay and stones. They didn't find anything strange on the first 2 feet, but about 3 feet below, Apprentice's. It hit something solid with the shovel. It wasn't a rock. If they cleaned off the dirt, they could see that it was made of wood. It was flat and smooth. A door under the floor of the barn, there was a door. It was made of thick wood and was held together with iron bands. It had been forgotten and covered in dirt for a long time, maybe even decades. One side had a large iron ring set into it, and the handle was covered in rust and dirt. They stood around it for a long time without saying a word. The first was Dorat. To talk, she told them to put the cover back on and not touch it. He didn't say anything, but Austin could tell from the look on his face. His mind was racing, but Austin reached down and pulled the ring because of what he later said in a statement was a strong urge he couldn't fight. It was hard to open the door. It took all of Oslin's strength and, in the end, the help of Apprentice to get it free. With a groan of rusty hinges and a rush of air from below, it came up. Cool air that was much cooler than it should have been. It had been, and it smelled like something they couldn't place. It wasn't mold, rot, or death. It was a whole different thing. Later, Dorat said it smelled like something very old that had never been in the light. There were a set of stone steps under the door that led down into the dark. They were thin, badly cut, and smooth from being used. Austin went to the barn, got a lamp, and held it over the hole. The light only went about 10 feet before it was sucked in by the darkness. The steps went past the point where the light could reach. Austin was the first to fall. He promised not to, even though Dorat begged him not to. The apprentice followed behind, carrying a second lantern. Dorat stayed at the top and watched as the lights got dimmer as they went down. The stairs went down about 25 feet, which is much deeper than what you would need for a root cellar or storage area. They found a room at the bottom. It was about 15 feet across and shaped like a circle. The walls were made of smooth, wet stone. The floor was crowded. Earth. In the middle of the room, there was a table. not a workbench or a place to store things. It was made of dark wood and had 4 chairs set around it. There were 4 tin place settings on the table. The plates, cups, and tools were all corroded from age, but they were all set up in a way that looked like they were meant for a meal that never happened. There was a shelf cut right into the stone against the far wall. It had a row of glass jars that were sealed with wax on it. Inside the jars, there were shapes in a liquid that was no longer clear that neither man could make out in the lamplight. They were biological, that much was clear. But neither could say for sure if they were animal or something else, and neither wanted to look closely enough to find out. The most unsettling thing, though, was what was on the walls. The stone, from floor to ceiling, was written on all over, not carved. It was painted with a dark material that dried to a brownish-black color. The writing was long and hard to read, line after line. There was one line of small, squished handwriting that went around the room without stopping or beginning a new phrase. Austin tried to read his lantern while holding it close. Some pieces could still be read, even though most of it was illegible, wet, or faded beyond recognition. What those pieces said was enough to make both men run up the steps without saying a word. I'm not going to give out the exact words that were found in the court records because, to be honest, some of what was written in that room has never been seen before. That was fully explained, and going over it again seems wrong even now. But later, investigators found that the writing looked like it was from a notebook kept by someone who had lived underground for years. A presence was mentioned in the entries. The author talked to this presence and said it had been there long before the farm, before the valley was settled, and before anyone gave the mountains a name. The author wrote about deals they made and prices they paid, about sounds coming from the well, a hunger that couldn't be sated the normal way, and a door that should have never been opened. Dorrit said Austin and Prentice looked like different guys when they came up from the ground. Both of their faces were pale. Prentice dropped his lantern because his hands were shaking so badly, and Austin just stood there and stared at nothing for a few minutes. His jaw was clenched so hard that Dorrit could see the muscles moving, under his skin. She asked them what they found. Austin didn't say anything. Everything. He then went home, sat down at the kitchen table, and didn't move for 3 hours. That night, the tapping started up again. This time, though, it wasn't just in the barn. It also came from under the main house. Dorrit was the first person to hear it. A steady, rhythmic knocking from under the bedroom floor. It was so clear and intentional that it sounded like something was asking to come up. She woke up. Austin took a moment to listen and then went downstairs. In the dark kitchen, he sat down and stared. The tapping went away. From under the bedroom, it went down the hall, up the stairs, and stopped right under the chair he was sitting in. Then things changed. It stopped tapping. It felt like scratching. The floorboards are scratched on the bottom in long, slow lines, back and forth, as if something were splintering the wood to try to see through it. Austin didn't get any rest for the night through. He rode his horse into town the next morning, which took almost 3 hours, and looked for the county clerk's office. He asked for property records. He was curious about who and why had built the basement room. The clerk, an old man called Winthrop Jessel, was helpful, but he didn't know much. He discovered the first record of the Halstead property, which was registered to a man called Corbin Halstead in 1847. But there wasn't much else after the act. There are no building licenses. There were no letters about tax issues. He did, however, find one note made in pencil in a different hand in the margin of the property record. It said, "Condemned upon inquiry. No further settlement advised. 1861. That was it. There was no explanation, no information about what inquiry had been done or who had condemned the property. There was just that one vague warning written in pencil. like someone wanted to make a note, but it wasn't an official one. Austin asked the clerk for more, but the clerk wouldn't give it to him. Winthrop didn't have anything else to say, but he did say something that caught Austin's attention. He said that when he was younger there had been talk in the valley about the H. Halstead place. Old-timers, or people who had lived in the area since before the war, used to say that Corbin Halstead had been a strange man, reclusive and obsessive, who had come from up north and bought the land because it was so remote. They said he had brought something with him, not tools, not. Whatever it was, he took it underground and never came back up. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever found something in a house you were living in that the previous owners had left behind? Something that made you wonder what kind of life they lived? Tell me about it in the comments. I read all of them, and I promise I'll respond. Even though it was only mild outside, Austin went back to the farm that evening with more questions than answers. When he got there, he found Dorrit sitting on the front porch, wrapped in a shawl and staring out at the barn. Apprentice was gone. His things were still in his room, his cot was still made, and his coat was still hanging on the nail by the door, but Apprentice himself was gone. Dorrit said he had been working in the cellar. When she went inside to make the lunch, she came back out to call him, but the field was empty. His tools were lying in the dirt where he had been using them, and his hat was on the ground next to them, but Apprentice was nowhere to be found. She looked in the barn, the root cellar, and all around the property, but nothing. She called his name until her voice gave out, and as the afternoon went on, and he still hadn't come back, she got a feeling. She said it felt like the land itself was holding its breath. Austin searched until it got dark. Within a mile of the house, he checked every field, every tree line, every ditch, and every gully. He went to the well and looked down. The water was dark again, not reflecting the lantern light or showing the stone walls of the shaft. It was just dark, deep, and impenetrable. He called Apprentice's name down the well, but heard nothing back. Nothing at all. That night, he sealed the well by nailing planks across it, just like Grover Fenwick had done years before. He didn't tell Dorrit why, but she knew because of the way his hands moved as he drove the nails fast and forcefully, as if he were trying to close something before it could open. 3 days later, Apprentice G's disappearance was reported to the county sheriff, who put together a search party of 14 men from farms and settlements in the area, led by the sheriff. The searchers, led by a big, red-faced man named Hibbert Comtock, looked for 2 days but couldn't find any signs of the apprentice. There were no footprints leading away from the farm, no torn clothing caught on branches, and no signs of fighting. It was as if the man had vanished. Sheriff Comtock questioned Austin and Dorrit in great detail. Both told the truth about the tapping, the underground chamber, the writing on the walls, and the dark water in the well. Comtock listened with the patience of a saint. Even though he had heard a lot of strange things in his career, Oslin's story about what they found under the barn scared him. He sent 2 of his deputies down the stone stairs to test the story. They came back up within minutes. One of them, a young man in his early 20s whose name has been lost to time, quit his job the next day and moved to Tennessee, never telling anyone what he saw. The other deputy, an older man named Ferris Oak, confirmed what Oslin said. He talked about the room, the table, the jars, and the writing. He also said something that Austin hadn't, either because he hadn't noticed it or because he chose not to share it. Ferris said that on the floor of the room near the stairs, there were fresh drag marks in the packed earth that went from the stairs to the far wall and then stopped, as if something had been dragged through the stone itself. Sheriff Comtock ordered that the underground room be locked up. The barn was locked up. The floor was put back down over the entrance, and Comtock personally nailed the boards down. He filed a report with the county that has since been partially recovered, though large parts of it were damaged by water and time. In the parts that have been recovered, Comstock described the chamber as, and I'm quoting from the transcription, a space of strange construction and deeply troubling purpose, the origins and intent of which I cannot determine and refuse to speculate. He suggested that the property be. Austin didn't leave yet, but the farm was quiet for 2 weeks. The tapping stopped, the animals calmed down, and the water in the well, which was still sealed, showed no signs of anything strange. When Austin carefully lifted one plank to check, Dorrit started to calm down, like you do when the storm seems to be over, but the sky is still dark. She wrote to her sister that she thought the worst was over, and that Austin had started sleeping through the night again. She said the air in the house felt lighter, and that she was beginning to think they could stay. She was wrong. On November 3rd, 1891, Dorrit woke up at exactly 3 a.m. She knew the time because Austin's pocket watch was on the nightstand and the moonlight shining through the window made the face of the watch very clear. She wasn't woken by a sound, but by a feeling. She later said it felt like she was being watched by something very close. She lay still, her eyes getting used to the darkness, and listened. The house was quiet. Austin was sleeping next to her, his breathing deep and steady. The wind outside was calm. There was nothing to be afraid of, but she looked anyway. There was a shape in the corner farthest from the bed, where the wardrobe stood against the wall. It was darker than the shadows around it and tall, almost reaching the ceiling. It didn't have any clear features. That thing wasn't a person, it was just a presence, a mass of darkness that shouldn't have been there. And it was watching her. She could feel its weight on her chest. She tried to wake Austin up. Her hand was shaking as she reached for him and grabbed his arm, but he didn't move. She shook him, but he didn't move. She dug her nails into his skin, but he didn't move. It was like he was far away, somewhere outside of her reach. She looked back at the corner and saw that the shape had moved closer, maybe a foot or two, but it was closer nonetheless. As it moved, the room's temperature dropped so quickly that Dorrit could see her own breath in the moonlight. She opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out. Her throat tightened, and her voice went silent as if someone had grabbed her from the inside. The shape moved again, closer, and she could feel a pressure against her skin, against her. Then she felt something very old and patient leaning toward her with an interest that wasn't curiosity but something much more intimate and possessive. The pocket watch on the nightstand started to tick louder. Or maybe it had always been that loud, and she was just now becoming aware of it. Tick, tick, tick. Each beat seemed to slow down and stretch, as if time itself were getting thicker. And in the middle of the ticks, in that impossible silence, she heard it. A whisper, not from the shape, from. One word kept being said so quietly that she felt it more than heard it. Her name, Dorrit. It was said in a voice that sounded like an apprentice's, but not quite. Whatever was talking had learned the sounds but not the warmth behind them. It was a perfect copy of the sounds but lacking everything that made them human. The shape in the corner disappeared when the first gray light of dawn hit the window. It didn't fade or go away. As soon as the sun came up, Dorrit did nothing until it was fully light outside. She then got dressed, woke Austin up, and went to the barn. She moved the tools that had been put over the locked door, pried up the boards, and walked down the stone stairs with just one candle. What she found, according to what she later told Sheriff Comstock, was that the room had changed. The table and chairs were still set up, but the jars on the shelves had been moved. There was no writing on the walls anymore, not a single word, line, or mark, just smooth, wet stone that looked like it had been scrubbed clean. And in the middle of the table, where there had been nothing before, there was a single object. A pocket watch that looked exactly like the one on Oslin's nightstand, same brand, same case, and same chain. But when Dorrit opened it, the face inside wasn't a clock face. It was a... The picture was small and faded, and it showed a man she had never seen before standing in front of the Halstead farmhouse. The farmhouse looked older and darker, like it had been taken in someone else's time instead of hers, and the man wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at the well. Dorrit said that the man's face showed complete and unchangeable grief. She took the watch upstairs and showed it to Austin when he finally woke up. He looked at it in silence for a long time before setting it down. There was another watch on the table next to it that looked exactly the same. He asked Dorrit where she had found it, and she told him. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he got up, walked outside, and started to tear the well apart. Not seal it, tear it apart. He worked all day and into the evening with a ferocity that Dorrit had never seen in him. By nightfall, the well was just a pile of rocks around a dark hole in the ground. What happened over there was so dark that not even the sun could shine through. Austin stood at the edge and stared down for almost an hour. Dorrit watched from the porch, afraid to go near or call out for fear that whatever was down there would hear her and come back. Eventually, Austin turned around and walked back to the house. She said that his face had changed. It wasn't old or scared, but empty, as if something important had been taken from behind his eyes. The next 3 weeks were recorded in bits and pieces from Dorrit's letters, Sheriff Comtock's supplementary reports, and the accounts of 2 neighbors who visited the farm during that time. The account is incomplete, sometimes contradictory, and deeply unsettling in what it means. Austin stopped working on the farm. He spent his days sitting at the kitchen table and staring at the 2 pocket watches that were laid out next to each other. He ate when Dorrit put food in front of him, but he did not eat. He stopped talking almost altogether, and when he did, it was like he was responding to a conversation that Dorrit couldn't hear. He would say things like, "Yes, I understand," "Not yet," or most disturbingly, "I know where he is." When Dorrit asked him what he meant, he looked at her like he had forgotten she was there, and then he smiled, but it wasn't his smile. It was too wide, too knowing, too. The last thing Dor remembered him saying was, "He is where we all go down." On November 22nd, a neighbor named Kessler Vaughn rode to the farm to return a tool he had borrowed weeks earlier. The house was empty, and the front door was open. He searched the property but didn't find anyone. Both horses were still in the field, and the kitchen table was set for a meal that had never been eaten. There were 2 pocket watches next to each other, and they both stopped at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. It was now possible to get into the underground chamber that Sheriff Comtock had sealed off, but the boards were no longer broken or stacked nearby or thrown away in the barn. They were gone, as if they had never been there. Kessler, to his credit and lasting regret, went down the stairs. He did so with a lantern and found the room exactly as Dorrit had described it on her last visit, with bare walls, a table, chairs, and jars on the shelf. However, there were now 6 place settings instead of 4. 6 plates, 6 cups, and 6 sets of utensils. And in 2 of the chairs, slumped as if asleep, were shapes that Kessler couldn't bring himself to describe in detail. He only said that they were about the size and shape of people, but they weren't people. They were made of something he couldn't name, something dark that seemed to move and breathe in the lantern light and turn toward him when he walked into the room. He ran. He didn't stop running until he got to his own land, which was about 4 miles away. When Sheriff Comtock showed up at the Halstead farm the next morning with 6 armed men, everything Kessler had seen was gone. The chairs were empty, and the room was quiet. But the 6 place settings were still there, and on the wall, written in the same dark substance that had been on the stones before, was a single line of text that said, "We are set for supper. We're waiting for the rest. Sheriff Comtock told his men to destroy the room, so they did. They filled it with rubble and sealed thee. He made the entrance with poured concrete, which was a new technology in the area at the time. He then had the well filled with stone and dirt until it was level with the ground. In his final report, he said that the Halstead property was unfit for living on, and suggested that the county take it back and stop any more settlement. This suggestion was accepted, and the property sat empty and officially condemned for 17 years. But here's what bothers me, and this is where the story starts. As the county records were being reorganized and moved to a new courthouse in 1998, a clerk found something that had been misfiled. It was a letter from 1860 written by Corbin Halstead, who was the original owner of the property. The letter was not addressed to anyone and had no greeting, closing, or signature. It was just one page of text written in handwriting that matched samples found on the original property deed. And what it said was pretty scary. Corbin wrote that when he dug the well, he found something beneath the ground, not water, but something else, an opening, a space. He talked about going up into it and finding a stone chamber that he was sure no one had built. The walls, he wrote, were covered in marks, not writing or symbols, but impressions, as if something had pressed itself against the stone from the other side and left the shape of its body. He wrote that the chamber was unbelievably cold, and the air. He wrote that he understood in a way he couldn't explain that the chamber wasn't a room, it was a mouth that was open and hungry. He set the table and the dishes because he thought, in his growing madness, that if he showed hospitality, whatever lived in that space would be satisfied. He set 4 places because there were 4 of them, but he never said who or what the other 3 were. And he wrote, "I have sat at the table and eaten, and now I understand that the meal is not for us." This line has stuck with me ever since I first read this story. We're the food. Austin and Dorrit Mercer, Apprentice Galt, Grover Fenwick, the owner before them, and Corbin H. Halstead, who bought the land in 1847 but wasn't seen again after 1860, were all never found. That's 5 people over 4 decades. There was only one piece of property that connected the 2 properties, but it was gone without a trace. The Halstead farm was empty at the turn of the century through 2 wars, and as the valley slowly became more modern. It was torn down in 1953 by a county work crew preparing the land for a road that was never built. The crew foreman, Radburn Sills, wrote in his work log that when they broke through the concrete seal over the underground chamber, they found it exactly as they had found it. In the old reports, they talked about the table, chairs, and place settings. The air rising from below was so cold that frost formed on their equipment in the middle of July. He also wrote something else in the margin that wasn't found until decades later, when the log was digitized. Counted the plates. There are 9 now. Someone on the crew didn't go back down to check, so they filled the chamber with dirt, gravel, and concrete. They then paved over the spot. The Halstead farm story ended there, but I sometimes wonder if stories like this ever really end. The land is still there, but the road was never built, so the site is hidden under a thin layer of asphalt and decades of overgrowth in a southern Appalachian county that most people have never heard of. And if Corbin Halstead was right, and that chamber wasn't a room but a mouth, then filling it with concrete wasn't closing it. It was just giving it something else. Austin Mercer went to the Halstead farm looking for a new start, but what he found was something old, something that had been waiting patiently in the dark, under the thin skin of the world. It is still there, under the ground, under the silence, adding another place at the table. And if you're listening to this right now, wherever you are, let me ask you one last thing. Have you ever stood on a piece of land and felt for a moment that the ground beneath your feet was alive? If you've had that feeling, trust it and walk away. If you have a story like this about something that happened in your town, with your family, or somewhere else you've been, share it in the comments. It could be our next video. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one.